Dr. Spock.
Dr. Spock's famous book on child care came out in 1946, just about a year after the United States set off its first atom bombs. Spock was from a New England family, went to Yale and Columbia. His book was loving in tone, practical in detail, suitable to its time. Peace had been declared, but the Cold War was beginning. In 1949, the communists took over in China. Within 2 years, we had troops fighting in Korea. We exploded an H-bomb and attacked communist subversion. Young people were called apathetic. The Committee for a Sane Nuclear Policy twice asked Spock to join, but he felt it was his job to reassure mothers, not to alarm them. 1961, the Bay of Pigs, an abortive invasion of Cuba. Then, Berlin, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. We began to send advisors to Vietnam. Young people, not so apathetic, are refusing to go into air raid shelters. Now, Spock changes his mind, joins SANE. In the interests of peace, he campaigns for Johnson. Like many others, he feels betrayed when Johnson escalates the war in Vietnam. In the mid-60s, the protesters increased rapidly, not only here, but in other countries too. The young are especially indignant. Spock has become one of the leaders of the peace movement. In 1968, the government indicts him and 4 others on a charge of conspiracy. The prosecution's evidence consists largely of newsreel footage in which the alleged conspirators subvert the administration of the Selective Service Law.
Because I think it is destroying the good name and the leadership of the United States.
The United States has become a house divided.
We meet and gather throughout the city of New York on this day in order to give an opportunity to all New Yorkers to exercise their most American and patriotic rights. On this day in which all Americans remember our most precious heritage.
These demonstrations are a clear, reputable statement that the overwhelming majority of the American people of all ages are against the war and want the troops brought home now.
Peace! Now! Peace! Now! Peace! Now!
We pledge to say no to this war, to say yes to peace. And we say yes to the work of stopping this war.
a subsequent trial, he and 3 others were found guilty. They were acquitted in July 1969. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Benjamin Spock.
Thank you. What I want to talk about tonight is the theme of dissent. The basis of our crime was signing the call to resist illegitimate authority. What this said, in effect, was we older people, mostly faculty people, stood morally and also offered to raise money for the legal defense of the young men who, in conscience, refused to go to kill and be killed in Vietnam. They were relying on the Nuremberg principle by which the United States and its allies tried and put to death a considerable number of Germans and Japanese that we were accused of being war criminals. Well, all the young men who've been sent to jail for defying the draft have said this is clearly an illegal war all the way through, not slightly illegal, totally illegal. I don't think this is because the United States is worse than any other country. I think this is the way any country, I'd say, any country behaves when it thinks it has the power. It never admits that it's doing anything brutal or imperialistic. It always gives marvelous-sounding excuses. The British, when they were controlled all those red parts of the map of the world, they said it was the white man's burden. Poor Britain, with the burden, the white man's burden on their shoulders, trudging along, trying to help the downtrodden part of the world. Nonsense! They were there for their imperialist purposes. The United States says, we're protecting them from communism. And it works. America is so hypnotized or deluded or paranoid that anytime anybody says it's the communists, we say they're bad, we're good. The danger of paranoia is not just that it's crazy, it's that it's terribly dangerous when a country begins to misread the realities, consistently misread the realities. Sooner or later, it's going to get into trouble.
Do you consider as some that Lyndon Johnson, because of the Bay of Tonkin agreement, that he's a war criminal?
Do I think Lyndon Johnson is a war criminal because of the Tonkin Bay resolution? Yeah, I'd say he's a war criminal for that and a whole lot of other things. I believe that if we don't reverse America's imperialistic foreign policy, that we're going to go from one Vietnam to another, more likely in Latin America. Sooner or later, because of increasing poverty in Latin America, there are going to be severe social revolutions, and the United States is going to find itself on the side of reaction in the future, just as it has in the past, and it's going to be fighting the people who are fighting for social justice, because I think it's their country. It's up to them to discuss.
But don't you feel that communism is a threat to the rest of the area involved, and inevitably to our country?
No, I don't.
You do not feel it?
I think.
Then I guess you will say that the war should not be fought.
Should never have been fought.
Should never have been fought.
You know, our president, here I am giving the whole damn lecture ahead of time, the president Eisenhower, who was president at the time we became involved, said if we'd let those elections be held that we subverted, the people would have voted 80% for Ho Chi Minh. The people would have voted for Ho Chi Minh. The country would have been reunited. There would have been no war. Nobody would have been killed.
Then you think that the people will be better off living under a communist rule?
I think people should be under any rule that they want. I'm not for communism. I'm for capitalist democracy myself. But I think that capitalist democracy only ruins itself by going halfway around the world to try to dictate to other countries, leaving this country to flounder into greater and greater difficulties. You see what I mean? This is international law that it's illegal to remove people from their habitation and to destroy their habitation. The fact remains.
Lives here, human lives, human fertility,
I am. Let me answer about human lives. I have been trying to end the war in Vietnam from 62 when I joined the peace movement, and I've quadrupled my efforts. My whole purpose is to save both Vietnamese lives and American lives. I've assumed from the beginning that every American death and every Vietnamese death was a futile death, and that the only way to end this is to end the war. Okay. And the Declaration of Independence, one of the most sacred documents in our country, spells it out in not exactly these words. It says, when a people is suffering injustice, they first try all the polite and legal ways to get justice, and then it says if they can't get justice, they are entitled not to leaflet, not to picket, not to demonstrate, or not to sit in. It says they're entitled to launch a revolution to get justice. This is very strong language. I'm not for revolution because I don't think that the people who feel that there are terrible injustices in this country have roused themselves or sufficiently roused the American people to use fully the democratic process. They may wring their hands, but a majority of them will never get up off their behinds and actually get out and work hard. The reason that there are injustices is not because the majority of people are cruel. It's because human beings, as part of their nature, try to keep themselves from becoming aware of injustices around them. And the job of a small minority that is sensitized to an injustice, their job is to somehow get hold of the lapels or the nose of the majority and say, look at the injustice. Don't look away, look at it. I think no question that they served several purposes by prosecuting us, and I think that they tried to convict us too. They did convict us at the first trial. There was some lawyers say that though it isn't proper for the Attorney General to rig things so that a case comes before a certain judge, they say it also is quite possible to do without fear of detection. And maybe we were prejudiced. I'm sure we were prejudiced, but we certainly felt that the government couldn't have found in all the United States a man who was more certain that we were guilty. This was a trial to see if there'd been a conspiracy, and the judge, Judge Francis Ford, aged 85, though I'm not in a position to throw stones because I'm 66 and a half, crowding 85, he called it the conspiracy from the first day of the trial, which I thought was slightly prejudging things. You have to watch our government with this conspiracy charge, because conspiracy charge, you can get a conviction relatively easy. You don't have to prove very much. As our judge said, conspiracy is breathing together. I think to indicate the way our government has become increasingly ruthless and brushing aside the rights of the people is that a year ago, or sometime during the past year, Congress passed this law saying that people could be prosecuted with a punishment of 10 years in jail for crossing a state line to start a riot, and that it has the effrontery to try these 8 people who are being tried at the present time in Chicago. In the first place, they had every legal and constitutional right to be there. The president's own commission on violence said it was a police riot. I myself know as a leader of the peace movement that the FBI, when peace groups in cities have hired buses to carry demonstrators to Washington to demonstrate against an illegal war in Vietnam, that at the last minute FBI officers would appear, persuade the bus drivers not to drive the buses, telling them that it was traitors who were in the buses. Absolutely outrageous that a police organization, a federal police organization like the FBI, is deciding who's entitled to express an opinion and who is not entitled to express an opinion. What kind of a country is this? It seems to me the founding fathers must be not only turning over in their graves, but beating on the lids of their coffin. Just a word on violence. I am not for violence, not only because morally I think one should avoid violence. I don't think that if you're trying to usher in a newer, more decent world, I think it's risky to introduce it by violence. On the other hand, I would admit for me as an individual that if President Nixon suspends the Constitution, begins throwing people into concentration camps, then to me that's overwhelming violence that he's trying to perpetrate, and I would feel quite justified And it sounds a little bit silly for a 66-year-older. I would join the guerrillas out in the Poconos or wherever the guerrillas are always meant to take to the mountains. I don't know whether I'd be a very effective guerrilla, but in spirit at least, I would be a guerrilla, maybe a pediatrician to the guerrillas.
What brought about your change? Like, I
don't think I changed. I meant maybe I didn't say it clearly. I believed all along that we should withdraw, but when people say, you don't mean withdrawal, just running and jumping on planes and boats, well, I always want to say, no, I'm talking about a responsible withdrawal, and among the responsibilities is to provide transportation for the people who've been depending on us, even though they are traitors to their country.
At this point, do you think there has to be a quote, what like the country calls an honorable withdrawal? In other words, like, do we have to, would you say the United States has to go out, you know, and save face?
Well, I don't think we can save face. I don't think there's any face to save.
Like you're bickering, man. You've been arguing like this, and you've been doing it in a cut and dry level thing. To go through a prescribed course before we take action, that's bullshit. We'll be 75 years old before we get all the prescribed facts behind it.
You like instant tea, and now you want instant success in your own thing. You can't dismiss my argument as bullshit because you label it that way.
I think you got it.
Yeah, we're going to get into
Okay, now you're going to get me into this verbal garbage, man. I don't want to get into it. Why not?
Why not? Names about arguments. I've stated my position, and I'd be glad to add Cito, but I think you got to do something. It's not just a matter of clarifying your argument. It's a matter of doing something. Get up and do something, I say. And I don't care whether you write letters or whether you march or whether you thumb your nose over the gate of the White House to the number of 500,000. Do something. So I stopped in that house, and your parents were very polite and very cordial. I wouldn't have known that they weren't old resistance people.
You're really lucky.
It is my great pleasure to introduce a very, very great man. I introduce to you Dr. Benjamin Spock. Hi, everybody. When we're remembering all the forces of repression in this country, let us not forget that it was the Congress that passed a law that is clearly unconstitutional. And for the Department of Justice to use such a law to go after 8 brave men who went to Chicago to protest at the Democratic Convention, this was clearly a law to suppress dissent, to terrify those who become militant leaders. Down the street.
have plenty of candles, but we don't have enough placards. Therefore, you march in twos. One will carry a placard and one will carry a candle. All right? Across the river, they'll light your candles for you. If your candles go out, there are relighting centers along the way.
Days later, the United States government announces that it is investigating leaders of this demonstration for possible violation of the new federal anti-riot law.
Well, there's no point saying it's no fair. Of course it's not fair, and that's why I'm saying get militant.